Afternoon. Is it still afternoon, or have we shifted into it? You know, as the last as the last person standing between your questions and our presentations, I promise to be very brief. And in fact, JB knows me well enough. I am often programmed to be a panel's last speaker because I can speak for 5 minutes or 5 hours with no change in total content. And so I'm going to give you a very accelerated presentation. In fact, it's going to be around this single point. That I'm going to change the scale a little bit, but indeed try to talk about many of the things my distinguished co-panelists have raised during the course of our 7-hour panel presentation, which is that, and this is a little argumentative, right, that are the key, but indeed cities are a key to both equity and mitigation, and that the regions within which those cities reside are the lock. And that much of what we need to do is unlock that value, that equity, that mitigation, that adaptation that resides at the scale of the metropolitan region. I'll try to maybe add a few adjectives to my nouns as we go, because I know that in addition to language change, we've also, language differences, we also simply use terms in different ways. So when I say region here, I will be talking about metropolitan spatial structure around that surrounding system of suburbs and exurbs that surround our large primate or central cities. So Ali, I'm sorry, can we go to the, you want me to run that, or can we do that? Yeah. Okay, so again, I'm sorry, I've got some animations in here, so you'll have to keep on. So why do cities matter to climate mitigation? Next, please. For me, in some ways, this is, actually bring the next one up as well. This is, in many ways, the fundamental diagram that organizes at least some of what we've been talking about. The figure to the left, and let me describe actually both first. This is the city of Philadelphia, a city of about 1.5 million people. Actually, our population peaked in 1950 at a little over 2 million. So we've had 60 years of population and employment decline, right? But we are still by far the largest city inside the surrounding region. This is a 9-county region that has a population of about 6 million people. That also includes 2 states, Pennsylvania to this side and New Jersey here. Now, the map to the left shows what we typically, in fact, we've already used it several times for other cities in this panel presentation, shows the greenhouse gas or CO2 equivalent ton emissions per acre. Right? Now, we often think of a map like that as not being denominated. Right? It's simply the emissions that are arising. But these are emissions per acre. These are location-specific emissions, which indeed report useful information. It's clear that in the city, in the center of this metropolitan area, there is the highest aggregate emissions going on because of the density, right? So that they are the source of much of the problem that we are trying to solve, and they are indeed the leverage point for much of the innovation, programming, funding, and so on. But I think it's also important to look at the diagram or map on the right, which now denominates those same emissions differently. Now they are denominated by population and employment. Right? So we see that cities go from being the bad guy in terms of emissions to actually being the good guy in terms of energy profile. So that in fact, when we are thinking about growth, reinvestment, redevelopment, retrofit, transit-oriented development, and so on, the place where we want to think about locating that new production, growth, retrofit, programming, investment, is actually in the center of these regions. Now, the green, obviously, the red green, I'm sure, is the legible color coding scheme. It's important to note that in addition to being the city itself, there are other places, and again, some of this is a product of the way in which the data are presented. This is obviously township level data, so this is a large township over here, but still, in terms of the denomination, it works. But the reason why you see green places like this is because they are connected to the regional transportation system, right? So there's a lot going on. In fact, Ali, I'd ask you to advance it, please. There's a lot going on that accounts for the differences between these two maps, but essentially, it is about centrality, density, and legacy infrastructure investments that create these kinds of advantages, what we'll call a low-carbon profile in these regions. And this would be typical of metropolitan spatial structure in the United States. Next, please. So, again, the highest return on investment for both old investments and new, say, transit-oriented design is at the center of these regions. Next slide.